You weren't meant to hear this later, you're meant to hear it now, because delay is the favorite weapon of destruction, and some messages are not suggestions, they are lifelines. You feel it, don't you? A quiet pull, a whisper that doesn't come from your own thoughts, a strange discomfort in what once felt like peace. It's not anxiety, it's not doubt, it's a prophetic warning. God is speaking, and his voice, though gentle, carries the weight of eternity. But we silence him with noise, with schedules, with pleasure. We say, "Not now, Lord. I'll listen when I'm ready." But he isn't speaking for when you're ready. He's speaking because time is running out. Ignore the nudge, and you'll awaken in a nightmare you built with your own neglect. What you call normal might be God's final alarm. God doesn't always warn through fire from heaven. Sometimes he warns through silence that grows louder each day. Through dreams that leave you shaken, through closed doors that frustrate you, through moments that feel like coincidence, but they aren't. Every ignored warning makes you blind to the next. And what you don't confront in obedience, you'll confront in consequence. You think you're safe because nothing has collapsed yet, but collapse is patient. It waits for the perfect moment to prove you wrong. You think, if it were really from God, he'd make it obvious. But what if his mercy is the message, and this moment is the obvious? Many pray for direction, few obey correction. God's warning doesn't flatter, it rescues. He says, leave that relationship, step away from that compromise, cut off that secret habit before it poisons you. But you bargain, you delay, you justify, and the longer you wait, the harder it is to escape. A heart that delays becomes a soul that decays. You're not being judged. You're being loved loudly, loved enough to be warned, loved enough to be interrupted. God doesn't send prophetic messages to entertain. He sends them to preserve what you're about to lose, your peace, your calling, your family, your destiny. If you ignore what's meant to save you, you will embrace what's meant to break you. This isn't doom. It's grace in its most honest form. You won't feel ready, you won't feel strong enough, you won't feel qualified, but God doesn't ask you to feel it. He asks you to trust him enough to obey. Obedience isn't always glorious, but it's always victorious. If you hear this, and something in you trembles, it's not fear. It's your soul waking up. Don't go back to sleep. Don't scroll past this moment. Don't let comfort keep you in chains. You'll lose everything if you treat this moment like it means nothing. Because when God speaks, he doesn't speak to impress. He speaks to interrupt destruction. So now the question isn't, is this message real? The question is, will you listen before it's too late? God does not warn to scare you. He warns to spare you. Every time you ignore a divine warning, you're not just turning your back on sound, you're turning your back on sight, because warnings from God aren't just noise, they're insight. They are divine signals wrapped in human discomfort. The danger isn't just in what's coming, it's in how blind you've become to it. You think you're managing it well, the sin, the secrecy, the small compromise no one sees, but God sees, and he sends a warning, not because you're evil, but because you're drifting. God doesn't shout to punish you, he whispers to prevent you, and the whisper is not weak, it's strategic, because God speaks in ways that pierce the heart, not just tickle the ears. But here's the tragedy. We wait for thunder while ignoring the still, small voice. We want signs in the sky while he gives us silence in the soul. The louder the world gets, the easier it becomes to ignore the whisper that saves. So we miss it, the sermon that hit too close to home. We called it dramatic, the dream that unsettled our sleep. We called it random, the friend who called out our blind spot. We called them judgmental, and so the warning fades, but its consequences don't. A warning declined is not a warning dismissed. It becomes a prophecy fulfilled. It doesn't vanish because you didn't listen, it waits, and the longer you resist it, the more deeply your choices settle into your soul. Think of a ship just 1 degree off course. Today, it's still close to shore. Tomorrow, it's in the wrong ocean. That's what happens when you ignore divine direction. You drift slowly, silently, until suddenly. Warnings don't always come with drama. Sometimes they come with delay. You don't lose everything in a moment. You lose it through patterns you refused to change, habits you justified, people you wouldn't let go, voices you stopped listening to. God's warning doesn't always feel like a sword. Sometimes it feels like a weight in your chest, a tension in your peace, an unexplainable discomfort. That's not anxiety. That's awareness. That's heaven tapping your heart, saying, "Turn now." The longer you silence conviction, the louder destruction becomes. Wisdom isn't just about knowing truth. It's about responding to it quickly. But many don't move until life collapses. They don't shift until they're shattered. Why? Because we've been conditioned to believe that warnings are optional, that divine direction is up for debate, that obedience is just advice. But God's message isn't a suggestion, it's a safeguard. The longer you treat prophecy like poetry, the closer you get to tragedy. When God tells you to move, it's not because He's trying to restrict you. It's because He sees what's coming ahead. He sees the loss you're blind to, the heartbreak you're tolerating, the destruction that's hiding behind your delay, and so He warns you early, clearly, mercifully. But if you're not listening, if you brush it off, if you say, "That wasn't for me," then don't be surprised when the very thing you were warned about becomes your testimony of regret. There's nothing more painful than living through what God tried to protect you from. So here you are again. Another moment, another message, another voice telling you what your soul already knows. You can't keep ignoring this. You've asked God for clarity. He's given you warning. You've begged Him for a sign. He gave you conviction. You wanted a breakthrough. He gave you instruction. And now the choice isn't whether He's speaking, it's whether you're finally ready to obey. Wisdom doesn't wait for comfort. It acts when truth is clear. Because if you keep treating divine warnings like background noise, you will wake up one day and discover you traded peace for pleasure, purpose for delay, and wisdom for silence. And the worst part, you'll remember the moment you felt it. You'll remember when you heard this, and you'll know it wasn't that God didn't speak. It's that I didn't believe the danger was real until it was. You don't get to choose the timing of truth, only your response to it. The warning has come. But not when you were ready, not when you were strong, not when you had time, because divine messages rarely wait for your schedule. They invade it, not to disrupt your comfort, but to preserve your soul. God's voice does not consult your convenience. It commands your attention. You want time to think. You want space to feel prepared. But heaven doesn't wait for you to feel ready. Heaven moves when danger approaches. And by the time you feel ready, it may already be too late. God speaks in moments of tension to prevent lifetimes of regret. Look back. The most pivotal words God ever sent you, did they come when you were sitting calmly with no pressure? Or did they interrupt you when your life was headed towards something you couldn't name, but felt? He doesn't ask for your permission to speak, because your comfort zone is not a covenant. Your timing is not His boundary. And your delay is not His limitation. A message from God does not need your calendar. It demands your conscience. The truth is, we often hear God clearest in the most inconvenient moments, in the middle of our plans. Right when the relationship feels good, right when the opportunity looks perfect, right when our sin finally starts feeling like home, and then He speaks, not with noise but with weight, not with drama but with pressure. A spiritual tension you can't explain, a sentence that lingers long after the video ends, a scripture that won't let go of your chest. God's voice isn't always loud, but it's always timed with purpose. You tell yourself, "I just need more time," but God's word is the time. The moment He speaks is the moment to shift, the moment to obey, because when God speaks now, He sees what you won't see until later. Obedience doesn't make sense now because it's protecting you from what hasn't happened yet. And yet, we treat the moment like it's negotiable. We treat the message like a draft we'll revise later. We call it inspiration when it was actually instruction. That's why so many don't change, not because they don't hear, but because they wait to feel like obeying. But God didn't send His word to match your emotions. He sent it to rescue your future. The danger of delay is that comfort grows while conviction fades. You tell yourself you'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow you'll walk away. Tomorrow you'll break free. Tomorrow you'll delete the number. But tomorrow is not promised, and more dangerously, tomorrow may not carry the same conviction. What feels urgent today will feel negotiable tomorrow. That's how the enemy works, not by stealing the message, but by convincing you there's time. Satan doesn't always need to lie. Sometimes he just needs you to wait. That's why God sends word in the moment where everything feels messy, not to confuse you, but to wake you. Because urgency doesn't mean chaos. It means clarity has arrived. Clarity that won't wait for your feelings to catch up. When God speaks now, it's not to burden you. It's because now is the safest moment to obey. He knows what's around the corner. He knows the heartbreak you're sleeping next to. He knows the storm forming around your choices, and He knows the window is closing, so He doesn't wait until you feel strong. He speaks while you still have time. And that's mercy. You keep asking, why would God tell me this now? Because this moment may be the only one left between your obedience and your collapse. Delayed obedience is not obedience at all. It's slow rebellion dressed in good intentions. He warned you not because it was convenient, but because it was necessary. He spoke while your heart was still soft, while your mind could still be reached, while your soul was still willing to wrestle with truth. But wrestle quickly, because the longer you delay, the easier it becomes to normalize disobedience. The moment of truth is never comfortable, but it is always crucial. You say you want to be led, then trust the timing of the voice that leads you. You say you want His will, then stop resisting His way. God is not late, and He's not early. He is speaking now, because now is the only place you can still choose life. Just because it feels peaceful doesn't mean it's right. You've heard the warning. You've felt the urgency. You know the timing isn't accidental. But your heart whispers back, if this was really wrong, why does it still feel okay? Because comfort lies, and comfort doesn't always come from God. Sometimes comfort is just silence, before the storm breaks loose. Not all peace is holy. Some peace is just the absence of conviction, after too many times ignoring it. You think because you're not being judged, you're being blessed. You think because your heart isn't trembling, your path must be safe. But that's not discernment, that's deception. The scariest part about ignoring God's timing isn't the fall. It's the false peace before it. The enemy doesn't always bring fear. Sometimes he wraps destruction in calm. You look around and nothing's falling apart. You still have the job. The relationship still feels good. You're still functioning, still breathing, still blessed. But stillness is not always security. Because God's silence isn't always approval. Sometimes it's the final act of mercy, the last moment before consequences knock on your door. If your peace comes from things staying easy, it's not peace, it's sedation. You're numb. Not because you're right, but because your soul has been resisting correction for too long. You've gotten comfortable in the compromise. You've learned to function in dysfunction. You've built routines around what God told you to release. And now it feels normal, so you mistake it for holy, but it's not. It's just quiet. Before everything begins to collapse, comfort is dangerous when it makes you stay in places God has already exited. God already told you to let go. He already showed you the cracks. He already sent the message, but you didn't feel the urgency anymore, so you stayed, and now you feel safe, but that safety is fake, because any place God withdraws from becomes a trap, even if it still looks like a blessing. The scariest deception is thinking you're walking with God because nothing has gone wrong. Yet, don't confuse stability with alignment. Just because things aren't broken now doesn't mean they're being built correctly. Some of the worst storms begin with the calmest skies, and God is too loving to let you rest in what will ruin you. So He'll stir your spirit. He'll disturb your comfort. He'll make the atmosphere feel wrong, even when your eyes say everything looks fine. When your spirit is unsettled but your circumstances feel calm, that's not peace, that's warning. He's trying to wake you because you're leaning on feelings in a season that requires faith. Faith doesn't always feel good. Faith doesn't always feel warm. Faith doesn't always feel peaceful. Sometimes faith feels like leaving the very thing that gave you comfort because you trust the one calling you out of it. Faith isn't following what feels right. It's following who is right, even when it doesn't feel like it. You say, but it doesn't feel wrong. Neither did the fruit in the garden. Neither did the silence before the flood. Neither did the comfort of the crowd who missed the ark. It's not about how you feel. It's about what God said. If He told you to end it, end it. If He told you to walk away, walk. Even if it's not chaotic. Even if it's still functioning. Even if everyone else says it's fine. If God spoke, you're not safe in what He already called you out of, no matter how stable it seems. And if you wait for discomfort to validate your decision, you may wait until damage forces your hand. But that won't be strength. That will be survival. And God didn't call you to survive storms you could have avoided. He called you to obey before they formed. When you require crisis to confirm God's voice, you've already missed the mercy in His message. So, no comfort isn't confirmation. It's not always a sign of peace. It can be a warning in disguise. It can be your spirit sleeping while your future burns quietly just out of view. God is calling you out now, not because it feels bad, but because it's becoming dangerous. And the longer you rest in ease, the harder it will be to remember what conviction ever felt like. There comes a moment when God stops repeating what you've already refused to obey. You ignored the warning. You questioned the timing, you trusted your comfort, and now it's quiet, not peaceful, just quiet, not restful, just hollow, not healed, just numb, because you thought if something was truly wrong, God would say it louder. More dreams, more signs, more red flags. But here's the truth when God stops speaking. That is the warning. God's silence isn't always delay. Sometimes it's the sound of judgment arriving in stages. You didn't listen when He whispered. You didn't move when He stirred. You didn't tremble when He warned. And now there's no whisper, no stirring, no warning. You keep praying, but the heavens feel closed. You open your Bible, but the words no longer pierce. You go to church, but the message no longer touches your soul. It's not that God has left, it's that you've grown deaf. You can't ignore divine instruction repeatedly and still expect divine interaction continually. You asked Him to speak. He did. You asked Him for signs. He sent them. You asked for clarity. He gave it in a voice you didn't like, so you labeled it confusion. And now He's silent, not out of cruelty, but because the warning was clear. And the clock has moved. There is a line between mercy and mockery, and delay will always lead you across it. The scariest part isn't God's wrath, it's when He lets you walk into the very thing you prayed to avoid. And doesn't stop you, doesn't interrupt you, doesn't rescue you because you made your choice, not with a shout, but with every slow, stubborn act of disobedience. Sometimes judgment doesn't come as thunder. It comes as divine silence while you destroy yourself softly. You thought silence meant permission. You thought if God were really against this, He would have stopped me. But He did try through conviction, through inner unrest, through people you resented for confronting you. But when you kept pushing back, He stepped back. God's silence is not absence, it's restraint, and restraint is the final proof of His justice. When a judge stops arguing, it's not because the case is weak. It's because the verdict is set, and in the courts of heaven, God doesn't repeat what you've made a lifestyle of rejecting. You keep asking, why can't I feel him anymore? Why does the message no longer move me? Why don't I cry when I pray like I used to? Because the silence isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. You silenced conviction until silence became your only answer. And here's the worst part, you can still succeed in silence. You can still get applause in silence. You can still build in silence, but everything you build outside of God's voice will eventually collapse under the weight of what He never blessed. Success without God's presence is the slowest version of judgment. You can still function without fire. You can still sing without spirit. You can still move without oil. But when the silence deepens, so does the danger. Because when God goes silent, it means you've tuned Him out for too long, and now the only voice left is your own. A heart that insists on its own voice will eventually live without God's. That silence you feel isn't peace. It's the sound of a patient God letting you taste the fruit of a tree He told you not to plant. And He's not punishing you, He's honoring the boundaries you set. You said you didn't want the message, you didn't want the confrontation, you didn't want the restriction, and now you don't get the voice. When you stop responding to conviction, God stops offering conversation. This is what judgment looks like sometimes. Not fire, not wrath, but silence, an absence of divine interruption, while you continue in self-made direction. And it's the most terrifying place to be, because when God stops speaking, it's not because He can't, it's because He already did.